the AIDS work of the past really was spearheaded by, AIDS activists and LGBT activists, namely with ACT UP and a lot of other groups and individuals really fought for the rights for people who are living with HIV/AIDS, the right to live, the right to access to health, the access to medicine.
There's been the creation of like AIDS service organizations that really arose out of kind of like AIDS activist grassroots movements, so like ACT UP and other movements. And that's been beneficial in terms of providing needle exchange, harm reduction services, but also the flip side, it's been kind of evacuated or split, divorced the activism piece from the service provision piece.
Particularly for trans people, we've got stuck with it's about services. And it's very deep for me. When I was involved in trans justice, when we first launched trans justice here in New York City, it was very hard for people to understand that we were organizing, because and still to this day, it's true, even though that was 9 years ago, most of the money and funding out there for trans-related, quote-unquote, people in general is about behavioral health or HIV health. So it's about your medical health or it's about behavioral. It's they need services. And it's all about services. And it's been really it was very difficult to get people to understand that, no, this is not a support group for trans people. We're going to do political organizing. And again, the advocate was this is buying for, and people are oh, so people are going to be advocating for trans people. And it's, no. Trans people are going to be doing political organizing. Do you understand that? And well-meaning, well-intentioned, but never, the concept hadn't been there for people.
And grassroots work, if it's really truly grassroots, it's about going into the community and building power among those people. And what we mean by building power is giving people the tools of advocacy to empower their lives so that they can help, shape public policy and really help and change and evolve and develop their community. What we see now with these professional nonprofit organizations, we see them really just advocating on the behalf of people. If you look at the real grassroots movements that we refer to as the civil rights or the Black Panther movement, these were movements, or even the LGBT or the AIDS activist movements of the past. It was about people who were directly impacted, taking ownership of their struggle, taking ownership of their oppression, and really doing what they can to galvanize their community, to build power, to really secure their community and basically improve it. So now what we see now is organizations really just doing the work for the people and really taking away that power that is really needed to lead to long-lasting, permanent social and systemic changes.
At service provision organizations, they're run hierarchically, and they kind of can resemble corporate models, which is true of a lot of nonprofit structures. And so that's really different than AIDS activists, for instance, or grassroots mobilization, which is supposedly, supposed to be more democratic and more horizontal in their leadership. So it means that at an ACT UP Philadelphia meeting, I'll be in the room with homeless folks, folks living with HIV/AIDS, and kind of directly impacted people. Whereas if I'm doing service provision, it's a necessary thing, but it's also kind of having a position of professionalism or credentialing and power, really, and being a gatekeeper for certain things. So it's really trying to push back grassroots mobilization against these forms of verticality.
If we really want to be about social change, we have to dismantle oppression and social hierarchies, right? I think usually the models of nonprofit pretty much fits the model of what we see as oppressive hierarchies, whether that's in Congress, being dominated by white older men, and just these models that we see in the nonprofit world. We see oppression, and sometimes we recreate those models because we see success as being, we model our success out of the oppression that we experience.
PEPFAR, for instance, is the presidential kind of AIDS fund that was commissioned kind of during the Bush administration, and there's a lot of strings attached to who gets money, international HIV/AIDS money from the United States, and most nonprofits that receive money have to have kind of a politics that isn't that's anti-sex work, basically. That they don't fund, it can't go towards sex worker activism, for instance. So people find like loopholes, but like in terms of like international aid and funding, like oftentimes there are those like strings attached. Yeah, so oftentimes it perpetuates the same type of colonialist, kind of like Western mentality.
I ultimately feel like decisions are being made by big organizations, and the decisions are being influenced by either the board or by funders or by grants or really just upper level executive staff members, right? Who did research, they know the numbers, they know the policies, they know the facts, right? But they don't know the lived experiences sometimes. Oftentimes that's missed. And I think that's a critical and key part is understanding what are those everyday lived experiences. Like we know what policy looks like, right? We know what policy should look like, but sometimes, often, we might not know what those policies feel like, right? And as people, when we work on policies for low income communities, when we work on policies for people we're not directly identified with, sometimes we can understand what might be the best policy for them, but not really understand how those policies directly impact or feel to them. That's why it's necessary and critical that those voices and those peoples and those experiences are always a part of our process just as much as we advocate that they should be a part of the political process.